The cube will now initiate.
Hey guys, it is episode number 118, and I am your host, Jemmy. I'm with the Curve the Cube podcast, and I'm so excited to talk to you guys today. This is SOLOCAST, all about how to become an influencer in your industry. And the reason this is very timely of a topic for me is because this is kind of just all happening for me right now. As some of you know, I had a presentation coming up for the Mystery Writers of America. Well, that has now passed, and I couldn't have asked for it to be a bigger success. And what came out of that was a sense of really getting noticed and really being seen as an influencer. So this episode's format is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be sharing the audio from my presentation because with it, it's full of tips on how to get booked on podcasts and how to have great podcast interviews. So if you're not a podcaster, but whatever it is that you're doing, part of how you can get exposure is to be a guest on podcasts. So you want to listen to all of that and take down some good notes. Oh, and also on the other end of it is how to start a podcast as well. So I'll be sharing all of that. So I'm going to leave that recording from my Mystery Writers of America presentation to the end. So ahead of that, I'm going to actually put the learning curve in the front. So things are going to be a little bit flip-flopped on this episode. So just, don't think you're losing your mind here. But quickly, as usual, my announcements. All right, guys, the Flintstone Media Podcast Network is officially in effect. Oh my gosh. So this has been over a year-long dream, and so it was exciting to finally launch it. This network consists of 3 shows, of course, Curve the Cube, also Eggheads After Hours, which is a show that I started like a year ago. It got off on a really rocky ground, but we figured it out, and our co-hosts put our heads together and worked out a great show format. So that relaunches July 3rd, so that's in 2 days after the release date of this episode. So please go look up Eggheads After Hours in iTunes and subscribe. Another show on the network is Hustle All Day, hosted by Jules, who you met on the last episode. So, of course, please go check out Hustle All Day. So I'm really excited about the Flintstone Media Podcast Network being launched. It's really exciting. And as I mentioned before, I'm also a Libsyn affiliate now. So if you are interested in starting your own podcast, use my promo code of Ignite. So that's about all I'm going to say as far as my own updates, because what I really want to use this time before we get into the learning curve and audio and all my tips from my presentation about how to get booked on podcasts and start your own show and stuff, I want to take a minute to acknowledge my friend Estelle. Estelle, you may remember, she's one of the few repeat customers on the podcast. She's from episodes number 21 and number 83. Estelle DeShaka, she's a very talented photographer. And I'm talking about her because she would be the last person to admit it because she says she's not very nice, but I'm telling you, this girl is amazing. I love the heck out of her. One of my favorite people on the planet, and her family's struggling right now. Her father has been diagnosed with cancer, and for anybody who has been around someone with cancer or anything like that, cancer is no joke. It is tough. So she has a GoFundMe out there, and I just would like to bring some attention to it. So I'm just going to basically read her introduction to the GoFundMe word for word. So here we go. It's called Help My Daddy Out. My dad, David, was unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer at the end of May. What we thought was a horrible fracture of his spine ended up being liver cancer that has spread throughout his body and is aggressively attacking his skeletal structure. Right now, we are just trying to get through chemo. We don't know what the outcome will be, but we have to at least try chemo. With that being said, medical bills are no joke. Even if you could just help out with $1, that will be enough, leaving all the other bills for my mom and I to worry about. Thank you, everyone, for all their kind words and prayers. And thank you to all those who have lent a helping hand. We are truly blessed to have so many people in our lives that love us so deeply. Help spread the word. All right, so that is what I'm doing. I'm trying to help spread the word for Estelle and her family. Please go to GoFundMe.com, and if you need the link, I'll put it in the show notes, and you can find her Help My Daddy Out GoFundMe. And please, 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 even if it's just $1, do what you can. All right, so let's start this episode with the learning curve.
Welcome to the learning curve.
Okay, so I know it's a little weird, but right off the bat, let's dive into the learning curve. So becoming an influencer can be huge for your business and your brand, and getting out there and breaking free from that whole cubicle rut thing that I've been railing against, right? So what are the benefits of becoming an influencer? Let's talk about those for just a second. Well, first of all, becoming an influencer is a great way to get known in whatever industry you're talking about. First of all, the posturing you're able to do. I mean, once you become an influencer, it immediately puts a proverbial cape on your back. You may legitimately be an expert at whatever it is you're doing, but if you never put yourself out there as such, how will you ever be seen as such? Also, in becoming an influencer, you can end up getting a lot of repackageable content. As an example, I repackaged my presentation to the MWA, which you'll hear in a few minutes, as a downloadable PDF and sent it out on an e-blast. I put it up on my website, etc., etc., etc. I'm also, of course, including the audio on this episode and creating a video of the presentation itself, as soon as I have time. And in the pipeline, I'm also going to be writing an ebook and creating some on-demand videos based on my content. So once you have a nice big chunk of instructional or informative content, you can repackage it and reuse it in a variety of ways. And when you have a lot of content out there, it means ongoing exposure. It's kind of a win-win. And when you do put yourself out as an influencer and do presentations or put out ebooks or whatever it is that you're doing, then you're able to gather feedback. And that feedback from people, from consumers of your stuff, can then be used as testimonials. Trust me, for my MWA presentation, I got like 4 or 5 great testimonials that I pretty much immediately slapped up on my website. It's fantastic. And I was able to also add the participants of that presentation to my mailing list. So that's another little trick for you and benefit of becoming an influencer. And all in all, the more content you have, the more you put yourself in front of people, of course, the more it increases exposure on your product or your service. So the benefits are fairly obvious, right? So what opportunities am I talking about and how do you find them? Okay, so as an easy example, and one you'll hear a lot about later, how to get booked on podcasts. So I'm going to share all those kind of tips for you as part of my MWA presentation audio. But the point I want to highlight is there's so many different types of podcasts out there. You can absolutely find one that you can be a guest on that will make sense for whatever it is you're doing and gain immediate exposure to their host of listeners. So try to get booked on podcasts. Also, look for local conventions and conferences that you can apply and submit yourself to be a speaker at. But make sure they're like several months out because they usually have their speakers chosen way in advance and you don't want to miss any deadlines. But if you do miss deadlines, just make note of it for the next year and make sure you apply. So it's obvious when, for example, as a podcaster, I submit myself to speak at a podcasting conference, or if you're a writer, to speak at a writing conference, or if you're an accountant or whatever it is, to speak at a conference that's dead bullseye within what you're doing. But expand your circle by speaking at a conference that's not in the bullseye, such as the Women's Empowerment Expo, which I just submitted myself to. Sure, it's not an expo about podcasting, but what I'm going to be able to do if I'm chosen to be a speaker, crossing my fingers, is to speak on standing firm in your own skin with a straight spine full of confidence. I'm going to be able to talk about acknowledging and empowering your voice and your message, and about how to shine in a male-dominated space, such as podcasting. And doing that, speaking at Women's Empowerment Expo, would put me in front of a whole new audience. So I kind of hope they're listening, because that would be amazing. I'd love the opportunity to speak. But also, when you're looking for opportunities to speak, don't ever get too big in your britches to go small. Find meetups and other event-based organizations that constantly look for speakers and special presenters. Because even if you're just in front of 5 or 10 or 20 people, instead of a room full of a couple of hundred, those few people can make really solid connections. And in fact, there's an argument that the connections will be even stronger because it's a more intimate space. You also want to think about how can you create your own opportunities by producing your own content. So of course that flies toward blogging or vlogging, which my brother's now doing. Shout out to Barry's Musings on YouTube. I'm actually currently taking a pause and catching up on his videos to record this. So shout out to my brother for his vlog. But and also podcasting. So, or you can do white papers or an ebook or whatever it is, but generate lots of content and get it out there. And social media, you don't want to ignore that, because even though it's, trust me, a whole other conversation and topic to dive very, very deep into, but in case you didn't get the memo, social media can be a fantastic platform to establish yourself as an expert and an influencer in your field. So do it. Do it, do it, do it. Now, another note on the idea of becoming an influencer. So once you're booked on something, once you're submitted and accepted as a speaker or presenter, what have you, once you're in front of your audience, whether actually standing in front of people or you're just ready to crack open a mic or to start typing or whatever it is, just pause and take a deep breath. Try not to get nervous. I know it can be a tall order sometimes, but try. Consider that you know more than everyone else in this room about whatever it is you're about to speak on. That's why they're here, to listen to you or to read your article or whatever. So you are the expert. You are, okay? Be confident in that. And once you're confident in that, now go and knock it out of the park. You don't want to ever miss an opportunity to leave a really, really solid impression. My buddy / client / boss / mentor / guest on episode number 74, Jeremy Pound of Juicy Results, had me watch a video when we first met each other by a guy named Ty Lopez. You might know the name, and I'll include a link to the video in the show notes. But Ty talked about how do you perform above the bar you set. So you set a really good bar of expectation for your client, and then you perform above that bar. So think about your audience as your clients, right? You want to set a good expectation, but then you want to exceed that expectation. So I hope I did that with the MWA. That was my goal. I had that mindset when I created my presentation, and based on the feedback I got, I think I hit my target. So it's always good to try to set a good bar and then exceed it. Think about it. You only get one chance to make a first impression, right? You've heard that a million times, I'm sure. So I advise you to consider each opportunity to present yourself as an influencer as an opportunity to make a solid first impression again and again and over to a fresh group of eyes and ears. So take it seriously. Now, as an example, one of the people who I'm a huge champion for, a huge fan of, is my friend Jafla. You've heard me talk about him before. He's guested, also one of the few double guests. He was on episode 25 and episode 69. He's an artist. He's amazing. I just went and saw his exhibit, actually, All Eyes on Jafla. It was fantastic. So if you're in the Miami area, Broward area, Palm Beach area, whatever, drive, go check him out. But anyways, he recently visited a group of school kids. Essentially, the students of Jesse J. McCrae, I believe is how you say it, elementary, the ones who attended the Achieve Miami art program over the summer, they got to get a special visit from him. And when he got invited to do that, he took it seriously. And he went and he made a really, really good impression. He knocked it out of the park. And the staff and the students, their families, and the entire community, they're going to remember him as a rock star artist because he cared enough to do a bang-up job. I'm going to include in the show notes also a link to an article about his appearance. I mean, he's just the epitome of being a solid influencer. I'm a big fan, in case you couldn't tell. So, here's the thing, though. In order to become an influencer, in order to become seen as an expert in your field, it does mean putting yourself out there. Dun, dun, dun. Oh my gosh, it can be scary. But listen, rejection can and will be part of the process. And there will be times when you flop. So I submitted myself as a speaker to Podcast Movement, but I didn't get it, if you recall, for a few episodes when I shared my heart's discontent. Oh well. But now I'm submitted to be one of their Ignite speakers, and I've been forming relationships with the people, wonderful people, I might add, who are behind the scenes of that convention. So if I keep doing what I'm doing and stay persistent, who knows? Maybe one day I will make the big stage. So my presentation to the Mystery Writers of America fell into my lap because the lady in charge, Diane Stuckart, she was a former guest and she had a nice experience on my podcast and et cetera, and she reached out to me. So I didn't submit myself to anything. But it's still, as a teaser to what my next guest on the next episode, 119, Yami of Twinfinite, had to say, and our conversation there, and a piece of our conversation is that without persistence, luck doesn't matter. What she said in one of her recent videos, and I quote, "I wouldn't have even given luck a chance if I'd have given up in the first place. Don't give up." So, as I've mentioned, there's going to be a special series this fall with James Oliver Jr. He's the author of a book called The More You Hustle, the Luckier You Get. I'll let the title speak for itself. But in essence, he's saying the same thing that Yami's saying. You can be a lucky son of a you-know-what, but unless you're persistent and you've put yourself in the right place and you've built up your own experience and you've gone for it, luck won't make a darn of a difference because you won't be prepared when it strikes. And Yami and James Oliver Jr. are both incredible influencers. So I kind of trust their opinion. And that is today's learning curve. And now, please enjoy this audio from my presentation to the Mystery Writers of America, where I both cover how to A, get booked on a podcast, the right podcast, and have a really, really solid interview, which can apply to being interviewed in any situation, to be honest, not just podcasting. But then also, if you so choose to go in the direction of starting your own podcast, how to do that right and get off on the right foot. So enjoy this presentation, mine, to the Mystery Writers of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get this party started. I want everybody to put your hands up, make some noise as we welcome the fabulous Jemmy!
The crowd goes wild! Okay, so how do we get booked on podcasts? That's half the reason you guys are here, right? Let's talk about that. So first of all, you want to target the right audience. So how many of you have had the opportunity, we know Diane has, had the opportunity to speak on a hot mic before about what you do? Okay, cool, a few of you, awesome. Well, most people haven't yet, and that can be very nerve-wracking about how do you even get on the right show. Because obviously, I'm sure most of you, if you have any opportunity to talk about your writing, you want to, right? The thing is, if you're not in front of the right audience, you can actually do more harm than good. Because imagine if, for some reason, you got booked on a show about fishing, right? Has nothing to do with your mystery novel about some murder that happened in downtown New York. Well, the audience isn't going to really get you. They're probably going to be a little bit mad that you wasted their time. It's not the right audience. So the first step is to find the right show. So first of all, talk to your friends. So a few of your hands went up earlier. Talk to them afterwards. Find out what shows or who they got interviewed by. Start with that. So start with your network. Find out who's been on a show and see if they had a good experience. And also start listening to podcasts. So there's so many different podcasts out there that you can be a guest on. So start listening to them. Get a feel for the host. Get a feel for the content. Get a feel for the format. Find out which ones you would feel comfortable being on. Start with that. All right, now there are some services that can actually help you get booked onto podcasts. I'll mention a couple of really rock star ones that I like a lot. Interview Valet. Now, caveat, I've never used any of these, so I've just heard really great things through the grapevine. But Interview Valet is one. Interview Connections is the other. Now, Jessica Rhodes, I do know personally, so I give her a little bit of a shout out. She's fantastic. She's a podcaster herself, so she understands what it means to do a good show. So I highly recommend her. And then podcastguest.com is another one, but there's so many out there. And you can also even reach out to an agent or a PR person. Who here has an agent? I know we have an agent, but they're a PR person. How many people have a PR person or agent? Anybody? Okay, a couple of them. So I get probably 2 to 3 emails a week, particularly from agents representing authors. So they're out there. More and more agents are becoming savvy on the power of podcasting, so that's another option as well. However, you can also do it on your own very simply. So like I said, find the show that you want. Then it's about reaching out. So how do you do that? When you reach out, you want to let them know some key things, okay? Some are obvious. Who you are, your type of writing, obviously mystery writing, but if you can dive down a little bit more into your particular niche, awesome. And what your book is, what you're most currently working on, what you're releasing, that type of thing. And then why do they want to talk to you? Each podcast has its own angle, its own mission, its own goal, what it is that they're trying to deliver to their listeners. And so, for example, one podcast might be really wanting to deliver some information about what it's like to be in the trenches of writing and become a published author. How do you get published? So maybe you can be on there talking about how you got published. So when you're reaching out to them, talk about how you got published, okay? So that could be your first clue. So you might want to rework your narrative a little bit, almost like consider it like writing a cover letter for that exact job that you really want. So, a little extra trick. Some podcasts have a really great way to provide feedback. In fact, all podcasts should, but some podcasts really nail it. And they allow, for example, audio feedback, a call-in number, or a way to email them. Start doing that. Once you're listening to the show, start writing back. Say, hey, I listened to this episode, and here was my thought on XYZ. And you can build a rapport, and you can build yourself up as an influencer, and you're more likely to get booked. All right, last tip on getting booked. Don't get intimidated. Podcasters are people too, and we know you guys are humans as well, so we're just two people talking to each other. So just remember that podcasters want great guests just as much as guests want to be on great podcasts, okay? So how do you become a good podcast guest? All right, so let's talk about getting out those nerves. Woo. All right, so you want to communicate with the host on social media. And the reason that can work is you're already starting to, again, build a little bit of a rapport with a host before you go on the show. So all of this, by the way, happens after you've already been booked. Now I've transitioned. So talk to the host on social media and get to know them a little bit. And what's great is sometimes then in the conversation you have on the podcast, you can actually bring up something that you guys talked about on Facebook or commented on Twitter. It's kind of nice. And prepare and practice. More on that later, so put a pin in that. And have a cheat sheet. It's so funny when sometimes when the mic goes on, the things that fly right out of your head, your name, the name of your book, your character's name, it's crazy. So have a cheat sheet of just those little things, and also include some basics about your host too. So their name, if you want to, for example, with mine, sometimes people I say, write it out phonetically, so you can pronounce it correctly. Write out, what your name of your website is, all that stuff. And then maybe 2 or 3 bullet points that you want to just make sure get covered. And then have that on your cheat sheet. Just have it right there. Last but not least, be on time. Be on time. There's nothing worse than frazzling yourself because you're running late. So just be on time. All right, now another good tip is to email the host about a week ahead. Again, this goes to building rapport and everything, but it actually could get you really, really far. You want to have a list of pertinent topics for the host. For example, those 2 or 3 points I said you should put down on that cheat sheet, that's what you can conclude in the email. Say, I would really love to talk about this, your next book release, or whatever you're trying to highlight in the episode. Now, there might be some embarrassing moments in people's lives. I know I've had embarrassing moments that are probably on the internet somewhere, I don't know. But if you have anything that's out there that you don't want to talk about, or even perhaps there's a genre of books you wrote years ago and you just don't feel like focusing on that, just let the host know that you just don't want to talk about that. And sometimes if you've become more and more seasoned and have a lot of interviews under your belt, sometimes you get asked the same questions over and over and over again, which can be okay. But when you're talking about the people who are listening to your interviews, hopefully, it's your fans as well, not just the fans of the podcast. And your fans probably want a little bit something different and a little bit of something new. So if there's something that you've been asked a million times and it's not really that relevant to what's going on currently, just feel free to let the host know. You can skip right over that. All right. And it's also fun to include a fun story about yourself because, if you look down at my three things on the sheet there, 2 of those are true, and they're all really weird stories. So, it's fun sometimes to share something like that with the host. It can help break the ice in the beginning of the podcast if they choose to talk about it. So it can be something nice to include. Also ask about their policy on colorful language. Most podcasters don't mind it too much if you let anything fly. I don't. Personally, Jules, I know, doesn't. And some decide to edit it out later, some decide to keep it in. But just kind of find out because there are some podcasters out there who really feel a certain way. And you just got to respect their show. Alrighty, so preparing to record. Now that you've been booked, and now that you're ready, how do you prepare to actually record? So, like I said, subscribe and listen to a few episodes of the podcast you're going to be on. It's also nice to be able to reference a couple of things from previous episodes. It makes the host feel really good, and then you're going to have a really good, smooth, fun interview. So that's a little bit of a tip. And if you're recording in person, chances are you don't have to be responsible for any of the equipment, okay? They'll bring it to you. But sometimes if you're recording on the internet, just make sure that everything's working right. Do a dry run, whether it's GoToMeeting or Skype or whatever it is. Just kind of run through it a day before or something. Make sure everything's running smoothly. And be on time. All right. So here's something that I've personally experienced a bunch, because I love it when I have a guest who's really eager and excited to be on. However, sometimes that excitement tries to control the conversation. And so, again, it goes to a little bit of respecting the show. You want to allow the host to introduce you. Some hosts like a long tail introduction. They really like to get into who you are. And trust me, they're gonna start asking you questions. You're gonna have a lot of time on the mic. Let them gloat about you. Ease into it. Allow them to fully introduce you. And stay present. It is so easy when you're thinking about, I really hope he asked me about this, and I had to pick up the kids today, or I messed up that answer 5 minutes ago. Don't worry about it. What's done is done, and what's coming may or may not come. Be present, and it makes for a much better interview. And you really want to pause and listen to the questions before you answer. So many times people answer a question, I'm like, that really doesn't have anything to do with what I just asked you. But it's okay. But, just try to really be present and really hear the question, and then take a deep breath even. Yeah, take a deep breath even, and then go forward. And just be yourself and be confident. That's the most important thing. Just be confident. All right, so what not to do? So we're going to start with the obvious. Don't insult your host. Don't insult the show. Okay, just don't do that. And don't forget to share, how people can find you and find your books, find your website at the end. So most hosts will allow that opportunity at the very end to say, okay, tell us how people can find you and follow you, tell us the name of your book, da-da-da. But if they don't, just try to keep that at the end and plug yourself. So here's what's less than obvious. Try not to yes-no your host. I love a good interview. Here's what's not a good interview. When I ask someone a question and I get, yeah, no. Oh, it's like pulling teeth, okay? So give a little bit. You guys are writers. You guys should know how to talk, right? I'm sure. Get those words out. It should be easy. Just flesh things out, okay? And also, don't sell your book. You're on there to talk about your book and talk about your writing and talk about who you are and everything, but the host is having you on there to contribute to their show. So keep that in perspective. You know, when you try to just sell your book and mention your book literally in every single answer, it gets annoying. And honest to God, I've heard this before, podcasters will drop an episode because of that. So try not to do that, okay? I've never done it. So I've heard podcasters say that they've done it. And don't try to shove information into an answer that has nothing to do with it. So I know you're super excited to mention the release date of your next book, but if it has nothing to do with growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, then don't mention it, okay? Wait till the end. And like I said, if there's anything that you find really important and the host doesn't get to it, use that piece at the end where you can plug yourself to drop it, okay? But trust your host to get there. And if they don't, just say it at the end. All right, so what really matters is forget everything I just said. Because what really matters is to just not overly prepare. You want to make sure you don't get into your own head and have fun. You know, have a good time. Have a really, really good time. So after you're done recording, there's still more to be done. You want to help promote the episode. Here's two advantages to that. Number one, obviously, if you help promote the episode, it's more likely to get listened to and give you exposure. But also, you're more likely to get booked on other shows. If I see someone who's really out there saying, I had a great episode on Yada Yada podcast, then I'm probably going to book them first because I know that they're going to talk about my podcast a lot. So promote the episode afterwards, share it on social media, embed the episode in your website. Once it's been released, ask the host for an embed code and plug it right into your website. Send out an e-blast. If you have a mailing list, send out an e-blast with a link to the episode. So here's where we get to the practice and portion of the presentation. It's interactive. How many of you did not fill out the sheet yet? Anybody?
Losers.
All right, guys. So the first thing I want to encourage you guys to do if you're thinking of starting your own podcast is listen to podcasts by other writers. There's so many different ones out there, and there are a lot that you can kind of absorb. There are ones that are authors and publishers and people in the business. Questions at the end, if you don't mind? So there's some podcasts where people are just talking about the business of writing. There are other podcasts that are maybe scripted mystery podcasts and scripted where they actually read content and read material and kind of make it sound like it's real. Like that old-timey radio, you know, where you had to listen to it and the images were just in your head. Kind of like that. So if you want to start your own podcast, let's do some food for thought. You want to first think about what will your show be? After you've listened to a bunch of other ones, think about what is your own personal uniqueness that can make your show different. And flesh out your goals and mission of the show. Is your show to simply sell your books? Then you might want to focus on the content of your show, of your books, of your writing. If your show is that the purpose of it is to become an influencer in the industry of mystery writing, then you might want to talk about the industry of mystery writing. So what is your goal and mission with your show? And make sure that your show is about the listeners. I'm telling you, this was my mistake the first probably year and a half in podcasting. I wanted the show that I wanted to listen to, which is great. But unfortunately, I had made a promise, and I wasn't always delivering on it. And the promise I was making to my listeners was, you're going to be inspired and want to go out and do your thing. And sometimes my show was out of left field. So make sure that you keep it about your listeners. And you also might want to think about including segments. I don't think enough podcasts out there have like segments to their show. Think about it almost like if you're listening to morning radio, they have a bit, they have a segment, then it keeps it interesting and keeps it flowing. So think about what segments you can add that might make your show really super unique. You also want to consider your branding. So flesh out your show title. I know I'm going to get it wrong, but my full show title is Curve the Cube, where dreamers become doers and find your passion to your, I don't know what it is, but it's really long, okay? And the purpose of that is to add a couple of keywords in there for discoverability. So the main name of my show is just The Curve the Cube, but when it comes to entering it into iTunes, it's a long tail and it gives it extra discoverability. So flesh out your show title with some good keywords. You also want to have good show art. This is really, really important, guys. iTunes requires at least 1,400 pixels by 1,400 pixels for their square art. If you do not have art, you will not be on iTunes. And make sure your show art is nice and clear. Here's a really good tip. Come up with a show art, print it out fairly small, just a couple inches by a couple inches, put it on the floor and step on it. If you can look at it and still figure out what your show is, bravo. If not, back to the drawing board. All right, you also want to consider your release schedule. Some podcasts are weekly, some podcasts are daily, those people are insane. But some podcasts are weekly, some podcasts are twice a month, monthly. So think about your release schedule, what can you personally commit to? And remember that consistency is key. This is another thing that I struggled with. Curve the Cube started as a weekly show. I had an episode out every single Monday, and every single episode had to have a guest on it. And whoa, did I box myself in with that. Because if a guest canceled or had to reschedule, it blew out an episode and blew my schedule. And you won't have build up good momentum like that. So you want to be able to be consistent in your release schedule. I'm now down to twice a month, 1st and 15th, and it's so much better. And also a word on iTunes, new and noteworthy. Who's ever heard the phrase new and noteworthy in terms of iTunes? Okay, I see a couple head nodding. New and noteworthy, there's a lot of myth that surrounds how you get there. What it is if you go into iTunes, on the iTunes software itself, the application, they have certain sections highlighted. There's their overall new and noteworthy section, kind of like a featured podcast section. And then they have them by segment. So new and noteworthy with TV, about TV stuff, or new and noteworthy about music, whatever. So people try to clamor hand and fist about how do we get on new and noteworthy. So the two myths are, you can only get on new and noteworthy within your first 3 weeks. False. You can only get on new and noteworthy based on a ridiculous amount of downloads and hits. False. New and noteworthy is completely human run. The people at Apple, yes, human beings, figure out what shows they want to put on new and noteworthy. So in order to get on new and noteworthy, there might be, there's a few different tricks and stuff like that. Come talk to me later or reach out later about new and noteworthy. My point is, don't get caught up on that, okay? Don't believe the hype. So how can you build your show? There are different formats that you can have. Curve the Cube is typically monologuing, I call it solocasting, or guested episodes. And with that, you can, for example, talk about the art of storytelling. You can talk about the craft of mystery writing or the writing industry itself, or even provide just tips on writing. Talk about character development. These are just a couple ideas, on topics that you can cover as a writer and the value you bring to a podcast and to your audience. Now, you can also choose to share content that's in kind of a scripted segment. For a second, it got dark. I thought it turned off on me. Just the picture. And so if it's your own work and your own content, you might want to read it, like an audiobook, maybe a chapter per episode. Just throwing that out there. You might be able to utilize yourself, your friends, and get some voice actors on there and actually really act it out. Wouldn't that be kind of funny? You can act as the narrator and then have your friends be the characters. Now, if it's other people's work, you can decide to share short stories. Now, here's the thing about the podcasting space. It's very young compared to other mediums. Only been around for fewer than 15 years. So podcasting doesn't suffer the same competitive side that other industries do. So it's common for podcasters to share one another's content, and it actually helps boost your own numbers. So don't be afraid to share, hey, this is my friend Sherry's book. I want to read a chapter from it. Or here, a listener sent in their short story. Let's read that. It's actually really a powerful way to build up your listener base. So read listener submitted work. There you go. And so how do you actually do it? Let's get into some nuts and bolts. First thing you need is a recording device. So a handheld one, like you might see a reporter using, they talk, no you talk, so they talk, no you talk. Little handheld device. I actually have one in my pocket right now that I'm using on me to capture this lovely presentation. You can also use your computer. I know that's the way that Jules primarily records his podcast, is via computer. You can also use what's called a mixer. Now, the mixer is kind of second level, so it's not really necessary. It's more like when you have more of a complicated production involved and you want to, you're nodding like you know what I'm talking about. You might want to involve a mixer at some point, but it's not required right off the bat. And some people just use their cell phones or their tablets. You can record some great high quality audio on your smartphones these days. It's really, really impressive. So external microphones are optional to start. I did not have an external microphone for almost the first 2 years I was a podcaster. And so what an external microphone looks like, it can be this little lavalier mic on my lapel. It can be this right here that you attach to a larger recording device. But they're not necessary because most recording devices have the built-in microphones that at least if you're cost aware at the beginning, you don't have to dive in full deep with an external microphone. And editing software, Michael was asking me about that earlier today. Editing software, I use what's called Hindenburg. It doesn't cause your computer to burst into flames. It's just a really good software. And I was using something called Wondershare at the beginning. Do not ever use Wondershare, it's awful. But other podcasters like Audacity, other podcasters like GarageBand, so they're different. I think there's one called Audition. So there are different editing softwares out there that you can look into. All right, and you'll also need a hosting account because once you've recorded and then edited and produced, you need to put it somewhere so people can listen to it. And what you need for that is called a hosting account. So I personally use Libsyn. I'm actually a Libsyn affiliate, Liberated Syndication. So if you decide to use Libsyn, use the promo code IGNITE, write that down, and you can get your first 30 days free. But Libsyn's great. They're in the business of podcasting. They focus on podcasters. I love them. Other really highly recommended ones are Blueberry. I would also recommend Podbean is a good one. There are also some out there that are not so good. So before you sign on to a hosting account, please feel free to email me and let me know what you're about to choose, and I'll let you know whether it's press go or not. And there's some RSS feed pitfalls. So your RSS feed, I'm not going to get into it, it's super geeky and technical, but essentially what it is, it's the file that iTunes reads that has the information about all your episodes. So your show can't exist on iTunes, can't exist on any app without an RSS feed. It is the lifeblood of your podcast. Don't mess around with that. And what I mean by that is get a good hosting site. Some people make a big mistake because they know that WordPress is great for RSS feeds because they do blogs. Do not host your RSS feed with WordPress. Anybody who knows WordPress gets hacked, it can go down, and if your site goes down, so does your show. Okay, so use a hosting account. And you also want to submit a preview file to iTunes. The reason for that is iTunes can take about 2 to 3 weeks before you're listed. And so there's nothing worse than saying, I'm going to have a show out November 1st, and it's going to be awesome. And then no one can listen to it because it's not there yet. So you want to send out a preview file. And what a preview file can look like is just a quick introduction to what your show is. It's actually really great practice anyway to have the very first episode on your podcast be just a quick minute-long explanation of your show. So that would be what I create first, submit it to iTunes so they can start working on their stuff while you're finishing up your first episode. All right. So how do you plan each episode? Now you have your show getting going. How do you plan each episode? First of all, prepare. It's really, really important. Think about your topic. Really think about it. So many people make the mistake of, I'm going to talk about this. I know so much about it, so I'm just going to turn on the microphone and get going. No. No. That's how you get endless brain farts and stumbles, and you kick yourself 5 minutes after you're done recording because you forgot to mention this, that, and the other. So write some show notes down. Think about your topic through. Do some research. Research can actually be really good. Even if you know your topic inside and out, do research. The reason why is, let's say, okay, you guys are mystery writers. So you guys know a lot about mystery writing. But let's say you just do a quick research. You say you want to do an episode about character development, developing a good mystery character. So just do a quick Google search, character development. There might be a fun article or something else that someone's put out there recently, and you can bring it into your podcast. It's a little something extra for your listeners, and it can be a really great way to enhance the flow of your podcast. And again, jot down your show notes before you get going. And decide on your release dates and stick to it. Like I said, consistency is key. So planning each episode. All right, so you definitely want to make sure that if you have a guest or a co-host that you confirm. And confirm, don't be afraid to be annoying. Confirm a week out, and then I would say at least 2 days out. Confirm. And check your equipment. So once you've had your equipment, you're going to want to get to know it inside and out and get very comfortable with your stuff. There's nothing worse than you had a great episode and the recorder didn't work. And that's another point. I've actually forgot to put in the slide. Have a backup. I have my mini-me. That's what I call my little handheld. I take it with me everywhere, but on every episode, it is sitting there recording, just in case my main equipment goes down. It's happened before. It's really saved me. So have a backup recorder. So once you're done recording your episode, putting things out there, how do you get the word out? Let's start with social media. So you want to use platforms that make sense. So something that you're already comfortable with, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. I mean, when people want to put the word out there, they're like, okay, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, LinkedIn, like they start losing their minds. Focus on what you're already comfortable with, and also look at what your listeners end up being. That second piece may take a while to figure out, but as an example, most tech shows will end up finding a good following on Reddit. Right? A lot of entertainment shows, if you have an entertainment show, you need to be on Facebook. You should probably also be on YouTube. If you have a show about business or the industry of writing, you should probably be on LinkedIn as well. So do things that make sense and that you're comfortable with. All right. Oh, don't Twitter bomb. Let me explain what this is. Okay, I've had conversations with so many people in the industry, and this is probably people's pet peeve. Twitter bombing is this. I'm going to put out 15 tweets every single day with a direct download to my link, a direct download to my episode. Here's why it's annoying. As a listener, if I'm curious, the tweet has piqued my curiosity, and I click that link, I might think it's taking me to a website. I might think it's taking me to an app. I don't think it's going to start playing on my phone, and then all of a sudden I'm not ready to listen to it. I hit out of that. Well, it counts as a hit. So people do that to drive their downloads and their hit rates up. Here's what's wrong with that. Once you start trying to get sponsorships on your show, you have to be able to explain your numbers. And sponsors and advertisers are becoming a lot more savvy at looking at your social media presence and seeing if that's really what it is. Are these true hits? Are these real listeners? We don't want to be paying for a show that says they get 15,000 hits every month if really they're only 50 listeners. So just be wary of that. Okay. Getting the word out. Continues. So send out e-blasts. I know, come on, you guys. How many of you have mailing lists in here that you guys, okay, good. So start increasing your mailing list and send out e-blasts. This took me a little while to get on board with, but it really, really helps. It's something that's so easily shared and forwarded on. So post your episodes to your website. Word of mouth, though, I'm telling you, is still the #1 way to raise awareness about your show. People like you. And they want to know you. And if you can talk about your show, you're the best advocate for it. So half my listeners at least have come from people I've just pulled aside and say, well, guess what I'm doing, okay? All right, how to keep going, because podcasting can be a commitment. It can be exhausting at times. There's a lot that can go into it, depending on the kind of show that you're trying to put out there. So sometimes what happens is called pod fading. And people just fade right out of podcasting. It's nothing serious, nothing happens to them, they're okay, but they stop putting out their show. So one way to avoid that is to bank 2 to 4 episodes. Keep them on the shelf. Maybe run through episodes, but keep a bank of like 2 to 4. And what that allows is if you're feeling that burnout a little bit, you can just say, you know what, I'm going to take the next week off. I'm just going to release the next episode, just take a week off, and it gives you that latitude. And ways to keep things fresh. You want to experiment with your show segments. I recently added, I think in the beginning of 2017, I added a new segment on my show called The Learning Curve. And what I do is after I've interviewed my guest, I pull out like 3 or 4 choice nuggets of really solid tips that I think I can really drive home to my listeners. And then I flesh those out more and I give actionable items on that one segment. And people have responded like crazy to that. So if you have a show segment and you can switch those out, it keeps things fresh, it keeps you interested, it keeps your listeners interested. And explore the boundaries of your show's scope. Because every once in a while, okay, so let's say I'm thinking mystery writers, Perhaps there is something that's current going on in real life that you can say, that's just such a tragedy or everyone's national attention is on it. Don't be afraid to talk about it if you can weave it into your writing. Like, for example, you might say, if we were trying to capture this kind of, let's say you're a type of writer who writes on things that have actually happened, but then you put your own twist on it to make it a mystery novel. That can be something that you talk about in your show. So different little ways to expand the boundaries of your show scope. Keep within the boundaries, though, and keep that promise every episode, as I mentioned. You also want to include randomly formatted episodes. So one of the most popular episodes I've had to date was the format called Vox Pop. What that means is I took my little handheld recorder and literally just asked, it's called the man on the street interview. And you ask basically the same question to a whole bunch of different people. Here's a great opportunity for you to do that. Anytime you guys are at a conference or something like this, whip out your little recorder and just, hey, I want to talk to you about where you're going with mystery writing. I want to have a show about everyone's latest book. I just want to have a show about everyone's latest book, and I'm going to feature 10 quick 5-minute interviews on that episode. That can be a really popular episode that just comes out of nowhere and your listeners really latch on to. All right. Also add bonus content. Okay, it can be a fun way to interact with your most dedicated listeners. So you can have hidden episodes that once you get into the nitty-gritty of podcasting in your RSS feed, you can actually have subscribers that are only privy to certain episodes. And so you can do that with your listeners. You can have blogs and videos and other extra stuff that you include as part of your overall podcast brand. Offerings, that's the word I was looking for. And you also want to make sure you keep your audience engaged. So how do you do that? Because that can be a little tricky. You want to get feedback. So everyone is so quick to say when they hate something, right? They're the keyboard warriors. They're quick to jump in and leave a comment when something goes wrong. Try to figure out ways to encourage people to leave positive feedback. And there are details on how to do that. We can talk later. But what's great about receiving feedback from your listeners is you can share that now on the show. And again, it keeps people engaged. Keeps people coming back. It allows new listeners to say, oh, they really care about the people who are listening, and now I'm one of those. So how to keep going, you also want to make sure you understand your stats. Any good hosting site like Libsyn, Blueberry, Podbean, they have really good stats that you can look at. And what's awesome about those, you can find out so much about who's listening to your show. You can find out what kind of device they're listening on, whether it's a mobile phone that they tend to listen on or a desktop. You can find out where they are. It's really neat. I actually want to get a huge wall map and start putting pins in every country because I have, I think, 25 countries now who've listened to Curve the Cube. That's really cool. And so, thank you. So, make sure stop it. So make sure you understand your stats because it can be a fun way to mention things on the show like, oh, wow, I just got a new listener from blah, 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 Bangladesh or something like that. And it's just an engaging way. It can be powerful. Again, if you're looking for sponsors, they might have a certain demographic they're trying to hit. And if you can have the numbers that prove that those are your listeners, then boom, money in the bank. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. But stay realistic because a lot of people just want their shows to go like a rocket. It's a lot better if you can focus on steady growth. Those are the listeners who are going to be with you for the long haul. All right. But ultimately, building an audience is about sharing you, and you. Because you are who people come back for. They come first for the content, but they come back for you. They get to know you, and that really helps engage people. I didn't used to talk about myself a whole lot on my shows. Diane, as a guest, can say I really didn't talk much about myself. It was all about Diane, which I love. But what I learned is if I allowed myself to break out of that, and I can actually engage people better that way. And don't forget that you have a lot to offer your listeners as well. So let's say you do tend to have guests, remember you have a lot to say as well. You're the expert. So in conclusion, why you should podcast. Okay, so it can really let your creativity shine. I'm telling you, podcasting has been the best thing ever that's happened to my life. I love it. And it's going to be a fun way to get your content out there. You know, I sneak in and mention every once in a while about a new website I built for somebody, or about, you know, an event that I covered or whatever. And it drives people back to my company's site, which is great. And you can expand from having just readers to having fans. So like I was saying, people want to get to know you. So if you become if someone becomes not just your reader, but your fan, then it helps build your base that way. And they're more likely to buy your book. And you can increase your connections with podcasting, because now your voice is out there, and if you get connections back, if you get feedback from people, emails, that type of thing, engage on social media, you're making more and more connections, both as far as readers and listeners, but also as far as people in the industry that can, networking can be key, and podcasting can be a really great way to do that. You can also become an influencer. The more you podcast, the more of your content that's out there, the more likely you are to be asked to do something like this and be in front of people who want to hear what you have to say. So it's going to be really great. So a couple more things. In conclusion, I passed around my clipboard. If anybody didn't have a chance to sign that, please do so before you leave today. The reason I'm having you sign that is twofold. One, I'm going to be sending out my slides, hopefully very early next week if I can get to it, but I'll be sending out my slides so you don't miss anything. And secondly, I'm going to be packaging part of this presentation and fleshing it out and creating an actual ebook on kind of like a podcasting 101, and you guys are going to get copies for free. So make sure you're on that list, okay?
We like free.
All right. Okay, so I also want to double mention my buddy back there, Jules. Wave to the room, Jules. All right, see, Jules. I knew, I was waiting for you to say, really? So Jules' podcast is called Hustle All Day. It's the newest member of the Flintstone Media Podcast Network. He's just getting off the ground. He's doing a great job. But he mentioned to me about a month ago, before I got the invitation to be here, that he's going to be doing a writer's series on his show. So if you guys want to get your feet wet, he's a good person to talk to about getting booked. I'm just saying. All right, so one final breathing exercise, folks. I just want to take a moment to let things go. This is about letting things go and relaxing before you either are a guest on a podcast or are ready to flip the mic and host one and start talking. You need to take a moment to relax. So I want to do one quick breathing exercise with you that I'd like you to consider doing before every episode, okay? Let's all take a nice deep breath. Let it go. Another nice deep breath. And let it go. Okay, so now the next time I ask you to take a deep breath, I want you to hold it until I ask you to let it go. So take another nice deep breath. Now sit up real tall, hold that breath, hold that. Now I want you to lean, like scooch as far as you can into your chair. Don't fall off, but scooch as far forward as you can. Hold that breath, hold that breath, hold that breath. Everybody? Great, now I get to go home and tell everyone I left people at the edge of their seat and holding their breath. Thank you very much. All right, thank you for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for always joining me on my journey to curve my own cube. This has been episode 118, where I talk about becoming an influencer. So thank you for listening to my presentation, The Mystery Writers of America. I hope you took down some really, really great notes. There was a lot of stuff I tried to jam in there. It was a little overwhelming. If you have any questions, you can email me. I have usually set my email address as curvethecube@gmail.com. But in this instance, in talking about podcasting and stuff, you can also email me at mediaflintstone@gmail.com. But either way, I'll see it. And I also encourage you to please join the conversation on Facebook. Go to dreamersbecomedoers.com and click the link to the Facebook group by the same name. Let's get the conversation started with tips and support. Please also follow Curve the Cube all over social media. And if you are in South Florida and interested in starting your own podcast, go to palmbeachpodcasters.com.
You have successfully curved the cube.
Curve the Cube will inspire you to pursue your own dreams and passions. Find your passion, do your thing with the Curve the Cube podcast.